You want to write like Dan Koe. I get it. He makes a ton of money online. People love his writing. He's killing it. And I've been spending days studying his content to teach you how to write like Dan Koe. And since you're a fan of Dan Koe, I know you want the real information. And so I'm going to give that to you. There's not going to be any crazy edits in this video, but I'm going to give you a ton of knowledge and information to help you make your writing better, to get more of what you want out of your business, your career, or your life. So let's get right into it. So first, how to write like Dan Koe. Before we even get into writing, why Dan Koe is so successful with his writing is because he's so deliberate. And to be deliberate with your writing, you have to figure out who you're speaking to and what message you need to be delivering to them to get your desired outcome. And so if you're coming to this and you want to write content or you're looking to become a writer, there's obviously a specific reason why you're trying to get better at writing. What is that? What are you trying to achieve through your writing? Are you trying to grow a following? Are you trying to grow a following for a business, which is really why you would want a following in the first place? And what is that business? And how can you make it so that your value and the transformation that you provide to your ideal people is really obvious? And how can you brand yourself as the solution to the problem of your target people, your target customers? And that's why Dan Koe is so amazing with his writing, is because he's very intentional about that. He has branded himself as the solution to a very large desire or problem, and that is being a one-person business and making money online. And he just positions writing as the way to do it. But this is really how he's branding himself. He's branding himself as the guy who teaches you to be a better writer, but because you want to turn yourself into a one-person business where you make a great income and you live life on your terms. So figure out what is that easy to convey message to the people you're trying to reach, and make sure that you're branding yourself as that. Because even though he does great things with his specific writing, why he's able to make so much money, which really allows him to be a very intentional and great writer, because he's able to write so much because he makes a lot of money, is because he did this well. You could write forever. You could be the best writer, but if you don't have this stuff figured out with a business outcome in mind or a professional outcome in mind, you won't make the money. And so unless you have money in other sources, which you're watching this video, I'm assuming you're trying to amplify an existing source or create one, then you need to get this figured out if you really want to get the most out of it. To figure out what is your bat signal, right? What is the story that you can tell? It has to be very easy for the person you're trying to reach to know they're in the right place when they found your content. Because the people who are thinking about this and wondering, it'll be so obvious when they want that outcome that Dan Koe is the person to give it to them. That's point number one, is really figure out who are you trying to speak to. Next, he realizes this is his ideal person. This is who he's going to make money from. But to make sure he's getting as many of these people as possible, he reads the room and writes for the entire platform, because he knows he needs to reach the masses to speak to the few. And so he does that by using a deep understanding of the platform he's writing on. His platform of choice, the primary one, is Twitter. And so he uses this as a content dump. He sends a ton of things out here into the void, and then he takes his best heavy hitters and brings them over here on LinkedIn. And I recommend you doing the same approach. I don't recommend you using Twitter as your primary platform, because Twitter is very much an insider's club. If you're not part of the community, it's really hard to break through, especially organically. Whereas LinkedIn is a little less competitive, the algorithm's a little more favorable for smaller creators, and chances are people that you know personally that would follow you and engage with your content, there's just probably more of them over on LinkedIn than there is on Twitter. So it's not just because we run a LinkedIn software. That's not why I'm recommending it. You can go, I recommend being on Twitter too, but I recommend doing what he did over on LinkedIn, making that his primary platform where he writes, and then repurpose your best content on another platform. The choice is yours. Definitely be posting on both, but that's my 2 cents for where I would prioritize my time given the current state of the market and the competition of things. So he really understands the people that are on that platform. And so he knows how to speak to people on Twitter because he was a longtime consumer of Twitter, which is the next lesson. To be a great writer, you need to be a really good listener. So if LinkedIn is your priority, go consume content, but don't just consume the garbage content that has been regurgitated by people saying the same thing 101 times. Look for the stuff that's standing out. Spot the trends that are happening. Spot the things that people are thinking about and speak to that to really make yourself unique. Although now we look at Dan Koe's content and the concept of being a one-person business and think about, yeah, it's so obvious and it's become mainstream. But before he really started doing this, no one had really branded themselves as that. And so you can basically find what that unique framing is to make it easier for people's minds to kind of like put a product or a visual to the transformation that they want. And you want to do that for yourself, whatever you're trying to achieve. And it doesn't need to be anything too crazy, right? It could even just be a transformation for the employer you're trying to capture their attention. You could be a developer and you want to basically brand yourself as the solution to a hiring manager's problem. That's essentially what you're trying to do. If you want to get into their mind and think about what they think, that's what your guiding star should be, but you should write for everybody so you eventually get in front of that person. And you only do that by really reading the room and understanding what's on people's minds. And if you can say what people are thinking, but they're not seeing it on all the time, that's what really resonates. And that's what Dan Koe does really, really well. He uses proven formats specific to the audience. He really reads the room of the platform, and he goes back to topics again and again. For this video, I went deep. I lurked this guy hard. I went so hard reading all of his content. And so first I was building up a swipe file. So I was taking his best performing content. And at first my criteria was 3,000 or more likes. And then super quickly I started seeing that wasn't high enough, because on many of his posts he's getting 5, 6, 7, 8,000 likes. And so I started adjusting my swipe file content to include way higher things. And so what I was doing, and I recommend you doing this, is it's always great to go study and learn from proven people who have already done what you want. And Dan Koe is one of the best current day online writers. So what I did is I went through and I looked at his best performing content. I added them to my swipe file, and I looked for patterns in what he was talking about, how he was structuring it, all the things that made these things tick. And success leaves clues. It leaves patterns. It leaves things that you can use to your advantage. And it's not that crazy. He understands the sentiment and the people that are attracted to Twitter, and they're really focused on transformation, mindset, and taking ownership of one's life. It's the values that they see themselves, or it's the values that they see in the people they look up to that they want to see in themselves. And so what are those values, those talking points that are these equivalents for your ideal people? It might even be these exact things, but it should be as broad or as macro as possible for the people you're trying to attract. Because if you get them all to interact with your content, the one person you're trying to send the bat signal to will see your content when they come and visit your page. So that's an important distinction. This stuff is the macro brand, right? So when you finally get people to your content here, to your profile from your content that you're written for the masses, eventually you're going to get a lot of people visiting your profile. And when you know exactly who you're trying to speak to and you're talking to that person, that's how they stick around. That's how they give you the outcome that you want. So we create for everyone to eventually get the outcome that we want from the few. If you just try to speak to the few, you'll never get pushed to them, because the problem with how all these platforms work is they reward engagement, and they're not that great at nuance in terms of being very specific and talking to one specific group of people. It's just hard to get off the ground if you don't get any engagement whatsoever. So you really got to speak to everyone to try to speak to few. And so he really figures out what those things are, and he goes back to that again and again, talking about transformation, mindset, and taking ownership of one's life around those key principles. Who are the people they look up to? Who's the people he's trying to speak to? And who do they look up to? And what are the qualities that are the reason why they look up to those people? Figure out what that is. We're going to get into specifics on writing, but if you're still here, this is the stuff that actually matters so much. You should be writing all the time, but you can write forever and never get what you want if you haven't done the thinking that provides the clarity in your writing. A lot of writing needs to happen, but also a lot of thinking needs to happen to make your writing more intentional. That's how you make words turn into dollars, is you figure out who you're trying to speak to, then what you have to say becomes a lot easier. If Dan didn't have this stuff figured out, coming up with ideas would be more difficult. Knowing what to talk about would be so much harder, and he would make way less money. But all this makes every part of writing a lot harder. And so if you're having struggle with coming up with ideas or writing good pieces of content, you probably haven't done enough thinking. And so I know I can already picture someone in the comments saying, you've not even talked about writing yet. That's actually the point. We're going to get into specific writing tips in a second here, but this stuff matters so much. So as I said before, he uses repurposed tweets a lot. So to match his aesthetic, he keeps it in dark mode, and he posts those on LinkedIn as well. It really creates a system for him to get as much content out there by brain dumping or releasing on Twitter, and then using the best heavy hitters and going over to LinkedIn and kind of double dipping with his content. And so he's also, now we're getting into some real writing strategy for you. And also, if you struggle coming up with ideas, we have a tool built into Supergrow right here where you can literally just come into the idea generator and type in a topic, and then we'll give you a ton of ideas. Like let's say mindset, I'll just type that in. And we'll also use the latest news like you just saw there. So it's current trending stuff that's actually resonating with people. We're going to give you a ton of different ideas. If you like them, you can generate a whole post, or you can save to use later. So you really have no excuses to not come up with ideas. We've built everything in here to make it as simple as possible for you to come up with amazing ideas. And so once you've done a bit of thought, once you've done these things that I'm talking about, the not so sexy stuff, it makes it really easy to create content because you will now know the exact notes you need to play to get the outcome that you want. So definitely try that out within Supergrow. Use the link down below for a free week trial. No credit card required. So now let's move forward to the specific writing. So he's very deliberate with the spacing of his content to ease the reader through it. A lot of his very punchy sentences, let's go through his tweets. And so you see, like, it's very deliberate, it's easy on the eyes, and it conveys a lot of information. And when he does do blocks of text, it's very deliberate that he wants that to be a point of emphasis. So he's very skillful with his spacing of words. And what I recommend doing is reading a ton of content from people who are good at writing on the platform, and not necessarily people who just have big audiences. I actually recommend going and studying people who have only recently gained a big audience. And ideally, they don't have a bunch of big connections that are boosting them up. You want to find the people who are growing organically because their content is really good. And that was Dan like a year ago. Of course, his content's still fantastic, but he's now reached a different point where his content, obviously it is good because it got him there, but he's now so big that it's a little bit different. I recommend studying people who are more on the come up and see what they're doing. But he's a great case study for just writing fundamentals. It's easy to read. It's easy to follow. It feels rewarding. And that's super important with your content, is because people have the attention span of a gnat. Even on the platforms like this, it's a little better on LinkedIn and Twitter, but it's still not the best unless you make it worth their while. So you have to captivate them with a general great idea. The first sentence matters so much because the first sentence, without it being great, they won't read anything else. And then it has to feel like you're progressing. When I read Dan's content, and I recommend you spending all the time doing this, and I've also do what I did too, go through his content and compile the best ones into a swipe file here in Supergrow or whatever tool you want to use. I just like using Supergrow because we have this little tool right here where let's say I wanted to add, let's find a really good one, a really well-performing one. I want to throw in this because it got 6.9, nice. So I can click this little Supergrow icon and then I can add it to my swipe file and add in the Dan Koe tags. So I can basically create a swipe file of his best performing content and look for those trends. That's why we built the tool into it, so that you can basically do this exact purpose. You can get inspiration. You can also learn a lot faster and look for those common themes and trends. And so when you read this, all of his content, it progresses really well, right? Like there's only typically one key takeaway per post, but it's so easy to read. And even the longer ones, they feel like you're making a progression. And so when you are writing content, you basically want to write it like a really good tiny book, right? And so the best books that you've ever read, I'm sure they made you feel like you were progressing. The chapters weren't too long and you felt a sense of progress as you were going through the content. You want to do that in a micro format to be successful writing online. If you're writing on LinkedIn or you're writing on Twitter, it should feel rewarding for people. So the first line is super important to basically get in their mind and show them and act as a calling card to the people. And so with your hook and your concepts, I use this analogy all the time because it's good. Online is basically like a very loud and crowded room. Everything blurs together. You can't really hear anything. You're just hearing everything all at once. But in that same crowded room example, if you hear someone say your name, you instantly can hone in on that conversation and hear everything because your brain is primed to pick up on things that are important to you. So that, you see this full circle moment now? That's why all of this is so important, because if you've put the thought in here, you know what those things are for the people that you need to engage with your content. You know the things they're thinking about, you know the language they're using, you know what are their name online. Because if you don't say their name, and I'm saying that as meaning things they're thinking about and worried about or want, then they're never going to consume your content. So you have to nail that with the overall concept, and you have to nail that with the hook, right? And obviously he's built a huge audience, so anything he makes will get a decent amount of push, but you're going to see some recurring themes, right? Luck equals, and then a lot of things that resonate with his ideal people, right? Like there's so many things here that you can learn. That example was great on the eyes because it literally felt like you were progressing as it got longer and more in depth, right? Do you see this? Do you see how easy that is on the eyes? That's completely deliberate because that feels satisfying to the viewer. So when you, or the reader, so when you're studying great writers, study every piece of it. Don't study the words, study the placements, all of these little things, all of these things that you're seeing on your screen and these words, these symbols, all this stuff, they're just tools. And basically you're a painter of words and you're trying to paint a masterpiece. And the masterpiece for this is the one that makes the most impact on the reader. It's not about you, it's about the reader. And so if they don't find it enjoyable to read for themselves, it doesn't matter. So basically you want to write for how they think about themselves, right? If you think about this, right? Like that's all he's doing here is he knows exactly who he's trying to speak to and he writes for them. So he basically writes as someone's internal dialogue of their dream situation. And when you think like that, it sounds a little weird, but it becomes so obvious. And when I was studying his content, it was just like a recurring theme, right? It's all of the things that his ideal people associate with and the people they look up to, the traits that they have, right? If you want to attract people to you, focus on your mission. People gravitate toward those who know what they want. I couldn't even pick a better example. That's exactly what I'm saying, right? So let's study a little bit more in depth in his writing. The hooks are around relatable experiences. It makes people think, wow, he gets me. He gets the struggle. It's the calling the name example, and that could not be more important. So what I recommend doing is building out a list of your ideal people's dream states. What things do they really want? And what are they afraid of? What are they staying up late and thinking about? What are their biggest fears? Really write those out, because those are amazing ideas for content. And if you don't need much here, even if you just have a few words of a potential fear, then you can come back in here to the idea generator and you can get a ton of ideas around those subjects. It can really be that simple. All the best performing content does one of two things. It either drives people towards pleasure or away from pain. Both can be very, very impactful, and they should be specific to who you're trying to reach. But getting back to Dan's writing, the other piece that makes him such a good writer is he does a lot of stuff. He has things to write about. With all the stuff that we've talked about here, if you go and do this and you attract a wide audience, this helps you achieve one of the things that you need to do in order to make money from writing online. You need to get people to know, like, and trust you. If you do these things, you're going to get a lot of people to know who you are, right? And you might even get them to like you, but I think you'll mostly only get people to know you for the most part, unless you're a phenomenal writer. How you get people to like and trust you is to have this thing figured out, who you're actually trying to serve to make money from and money with, and then talking about how you're doing that. Dan constantly writes about his projects. He talks about specific things that he's doing. He talks about his expertise in practice, showing that he knows what he's talking about, but also showing that he's a relatable person, building that like and trust factor. People buy from those that they know and trust. Of course, they have to know that you exist to want to buy from you, but they don't buy from you if there's another option that they like or trust more. And so to get that, you have to show that you're not just theory-driven person, but you're a practitioner, that's exactly what Dan does. If you go study his writing, some of his posts that don't do as well are about specific life circumstances or his business, and they don't do well, but that's the point. He spends about 80% of his content trying to expand his audience, and then about 20% speaking to the people that probably pay him 80% of his revenue. And that's where another massive mistake that I see that you can learn from Dan Koe: don't forget to write about the stuff that makes you the money. This stuff is fantastic for vanity metrics, but there's a lot of creators out there that have a ton of audience and they're making almost no money. And I hate to break it to you, I think it's another writer, J.K. Moline, I think his name is. His whole branding is likes ain't cash. And that is true. You could have the biggest audience in the world, but if you're not converting them, it doesn't matter. And that's very in line with Dan Koe's thesis. Write intentionally. And so if you don't have an intention, how do you expect to get there? So write for the extra 20%, do the things, share the things you're talking about, and anybody can be doing this, right? If you're writing for a specific purpose, let's use the example of you're a software developer trying to get a job. You want to write about your projects so that you can share the stories that get people to like and trust you by showing every parts of you. It shows that you are reliable. It shows that you can overcome adversity, right? All of the things that the people who can change your life, that either buy from you, hire you, refer you, they're the things that people are looking for. And so when they can come through your content and they get deeply in the weeds of it, which the core people will, because you've got this all figured out, when they start reading your content and it's well written, it's easy to read, it feels rewarding for the reader, and they're able to pick up on traits and values that you have, you turn yourself into the obvious no-brainer choice for whatever you're trying to achieve, right? Build that like and trust factor by talking about the things that you're doing that are related to what you want people to help you with, right? They're not going to go viral. Almost none of them will go viral, but they convert people. And that's ultimately what matters. So this is a strategy of how to write like Dan Koe. And I give you all of this because I think it matters and it's going to make you a better writer. But if you want to fast track your way to doing this, you can also do something with Supergrow that's pretty sweet. So within Supergrow, you can come into your settings, you go into content writing style, and then you can train a custom writing style for a specific task. So let's say you want to write certain posts like Dan Koe. What I did was I compiled all of his best performing content over the past year or so into a swipe file right here. And then I trained a content writing style in Dan Koe's style with only his most viral content. Okay. And the benefit of doing this is now I can go create content across all the different tools within Supergrow and I can write them just like Dan Koe. So let's go into post generator and let's generate a post, describe what we want to write about. Let's say how to overcome a limiting mindset. Let's say, obviously this is super broad, but you want to keep it fairly broad to reach a wide audience, but be broadly specific. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but you know what I'm talking about. We've talked about this. I'll leave the tone as is, but I'm going to write like Dan Koe. Okay. and then I'm just gonna click generate. And this model has now been completely trained on Dan Koe's best performing writing. And so look, it structures it just like most of his posts. So you can see your mind builds walls, but those walls aren't real. There's stories you tell yourself, I'm not good enough. I don't have experience. Someone else can do it better. Here's the truth. Every expert started as a beginner. Every success story started with doubt. Every breakthrough began with uncertainty. All the things that we've just talked about that were in his writing are now in here because I trained it on best things, right? Like all the things we talked about: short, punchy, strong hook, rewarding and visually appealing for the user. It's all right here. So if you want the lazy way to do it or build a tool that can help you with your writing, you can now do this within Supergrow. You can come into Supergrow, you can go into content writing styles, and you can train a custom writing style for whatever you're trying to do. So let's say you write newsletters. You could go train it on your best and favorite newsletters, and then Supergrow will write the content like that. Let's say you want to write certain kinds of LinkedIn posts. Like you have one creator that is really, really good at writing personal stories on LinkedIn. You could use the training model to write your personal stories like them, or the first draft of your personal stories. So you can really get creative here and very deliberate by taking inspiration from the people that are the best at specific things, making you the best at whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. So that's how to write like Dan Koe in theory, and that's how to actually do it in practice in seconds using Supergrow, which you can try for free for 7 days with no credit card required in the link down below. And if you're going to give Supergrow a try, definitely use that link. It helps me out a lot at no extra cost to you. And if you're looking to grow on LinkedIn this year, this is the channel to help you do that. I'm releasing weekly free content to help you grow on LinkedIn and attract the audience that you want that can make you more money. I'll see you in the next one, and go connect with